rare, and so if they both go extinct, then nothing will be there to stop the from overpopulating.
Awesome. Well said, Jonah. And I love that you used the word overpopulate. And the animals that your leopard eats, we're referring to as prey, right? So I think it was Layla, you gave us the word predator, right? Predator. And Jonah gave us the word prey. Does anyone know what predator means? What does it mean if something is a predator? I'm going to look for maybe a real hand. Is you, Oceana?
Like something that hunts prey, not necessarily the top of the food chain, but something that hunts and not like.
I'm thinking what you mean is like something that doesn't get eaten. Something well, it could get eaten, but technically it's harder because that animal hunts for food instead of just finding food.
Exactly. Thank you for adding on to what Oceana said, Jonah. Something that hunts, simply put. Very well said, Oceana. So then what about prey? Then what does our prey mean? What does it mean for something to be prey?
Prey is like it's a predator's food. Something that gets meal. Like they hunt it. Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of predator. It's what gets eaten.
Right.
What eats.
So the predator hunts and the prey is hunted. Exactly. Could something be prey and a predator at the same time?
Yes. They're like a little bug can eat other little bugs, but then a bigger bug can eat that big bug, and then another bug, like that's how the food is.
Exactly.
Like this thing is this thing, and this thing is that other thing, and it keeps going.
Totally. Awesome. And that leads us into our next activity today. Before we move on,
all right. So what I'd like you to do now, this box is available for you. You have the screen up if you have this document up, to set out something that came up for you. Just an observation, a note, something that you took your attention, like what was it that mattered? There's spaces here, hopefully for enough. If you find a place, just a couple thoughts right now so we can see how we're thinking about this. Are we okay with that? Anybody need any help with that? Looks like we're getting started here. If you want to put your name, attach your name, that's fine. You're not required to. So if you want to say, oh, this is what I was thinking, that's all good. And if you've already written something, think about what might the conversation with Teacher Chloe be about for you? What might you talk about with Teacher Chloe? I'm sorry, I shouldn't qualify it this way. I'm seeing both and this comes from something that came up from Neva's as well as presentation, the idea that there are many good things that Chloe did, but there's some things that Chloe might need to pay attention to as well. So how do we do both of those things? A lot about Jonah monopolizing attention. Jonah seemed to monopolize the conversation. It doesn't seem as though Jonah had to raise his hand. Teacher was always encouraging, students encouraged to answer because of her positivity. Oceana and Hatboy both raised hands, but Jonah was rewarded for speaking out. Jonah took a lot of the conversation, interrupted other students. Teacher gave credit and acknowledgement to Jonah, a few acknowledgement to Oceana and Hat student. Teacher made a point of indicating things were well said or stated well. More about Jonah. Teacher owns lesson and knowledge, confirmer of information. Who gets the attention, who doesn't? Jonah is focus of this clip. Also positive reinforcement. So we've got a lot of tension going on here because there were a lot of things in Chloe's teaching that were positive, but there's also something that's pretty outstanding too that we're all kind of asking about. So I'm going to move to this piece now, and I'm going to pose this as a problem. I often do this in my own supervision because I guess I come from math education. So a lot of it is like, what's the problem here and how can we work this out? Let's think this through together. So that's what I propose for us today. So we're working through some kind of problem. We've had an instance of teaching. We're also thinking about how to move student teachers to considerations of anti-racist and equity pedagogies. So how do these come together? So let's take a look at this. I appreciated Nevis in her presentation I just attended talking about the TPEs. We're all bound by the TPEs. I found them complicated, really worthwhile, and then also kind of limiting as well. So let me share a thought for you. So here are some TPEs from the different domains, from the first 4 domains mostly, that might be considered in this clip. And these are things that I might bring up with the student teacher, or we might focus on, or it would have come up in the pre-conference too, because in the pre-conference, we often talk about what the focus of the lesson should be. So if we think about this lesson, how the teacher promotes student engagement, I might, it could be, a lot of you had positive marks about it. She was engaging the students. She had different people talking. It seemed like there was high interest. We could say all those things are possible. How students are involved in higher order and critical thinking. Well, she did ask a really great question at the end. Can something be predator and prey at the same time? So she's obviously working the higher order and critical thinking as well. She's monitoring student learning and adjusting instruction along the way. She kept asking certain kids, chose to the part early on in the video where she says, I'm looking for a different person. She's obviously considering who gets to speak. The next one, how the teacher encourages students to think together, work together. Well, that one we can wrestle with in this particular clip. And somebody also mentioned that in the table above about how the teachers seem to be the locus. Everything had to work through her. So it wasn't about the kids working through the ideas. Next question is how the subject matter is taught in a way that is appropriate for teaching in that discipline. Gave you a little bit more context. After this, she actually had the students sit in a circle. She had a ball of yarn, and different people took on different roles within an ecosystem, and they were looking at predator-prey relationships. So she was looking at systems, which would be totally appropriate for teaching science. First and second language acquisition, she focused on the vocabulary of prey and predator. Expectations for learning are established. You didn't get to see the front end of that, and how time is used. So she's pretty good about time. So as a supervisor, I could have a conversation with her and say, look at all the great things you did. And how many of these things are check mark, yes, you did this, check mark, yes, you did this, check mark, yes, you did this. But as you all noticed, and as you put in the table, there was something there key that needed to have some deliberate attention. And just looking at the TPEs, maybe that's not good enough. So thinking about TPEs, I set out these questions. How do the TPEs give purposeful attention to anti-racist and equity pedagogies? How are the TPEs insufficient? I will say the TPEs implicitly push anti-racist equity pedagogies, but they don't shout it out. There's the use of all students. There's the idea of safe spaces for learning. There's some things in it that are built in, but they don't shout it out. They don't necessarily require us to push those things in the ways we might. So my question for us is, what set of questions, prompts from supervisors would do this work? Okay, so this is a place where I was working with my colleague, Celeste, over the last couple of months. We've been saying, okay, what does that look like? If our supervision wants to be pushing, having students more deeply consider anti-racist and equity pedagogies, what work do we need to do? So we've been thinking about, okay, what supervisor moves? Where do we get those from? What's the framework? So with Celeste, she and I have been working on something we call an equity framework synthesis. And there's a link for you right here. You're welcome to copy it, use it, take it, do whatever you want with it. If it's any way useful to your work, to your group, to your program, it's just a starting place. It was a place for us to say, well, let's put some groundwork here so we know what we're standing on if we want to think about more equity-focused supervisor practices. Now, this isn't everybody, but we thought this was a good set of people to consider. Gloria Ladson-Billings, obviously culturally responsive pedagogy. Lisa Delpit, Christine Slater came out of CSU Monterey Bay. Goldie Muhammad, many people are using her work these days as well. Work from Pedro Noguera at UCLA, the National Equity Project. And then I chose to involve Julia Aguirre and Carmen Mayfield-Ingram and Danny Martin because I'm a mathematics educator and they have a particular framework in the discipline. So a different question for us all is, as much as we want to think about supervision for equity and non-racist pedagogies, in a general sense, what are the ones that are particular to any discipline? And in mathematics, there are very particular needs and considerations. So that's why I included those folks. So in that work with Celeste, we just set out, made table, working out some of the main considerations. Delpit, Ladson-Billings, Slater, Muhammad, Noguera, National Equity Project, Aguirre and colleagues. And this was just a thinking exercise that we worked through. saying, okay, what do they all say? And if you, as you saw on that link, you have access to all of this yourselves. You can add and consider for yourselves in your own work. What we came to was some prime considerations, a synthesis. In this particular table, you'll see in the left-hand side, this is what came up for us. These were themes that came up across the frameworks. High expectations, cultivating students' identities, responsive teaching, disciplinary knowledge, asset-based instruction, criticality, home and school connections, and challenging spaces of marginality. Not everybody said something about every one of these, but each of these showed up enough times to say that this is important. So this is something we're holding on to right now. It fits in line with, we have what we call a wheel of social justice. It's a framework we use across our program. It cuts into these are in line with these considerations here. And so I'm going to define each of them a little bit more. If we were limited to the TPEs, it seems like we don't get as far as we might. But if we were to include these as well, or putting them alongside the considerations of the TPEs, what would they do to our supervision? So some definitions. For high expectations, how do we hold on to high expectations for all students, particularly students from traditionally marginalized communities, and convey belief in their possibility and efficacy? So some of you know the work of warm demanders. I think it's Lisa Delpit who writes about warm demanders, holding high expectations for everyone all the time, but also not just the expectations, the support and belief in them that makes it so those expectations can be realized. The second one, cultivate students' identities. How do we make who we are teaching central to what is being taught? How do students see themselves in their communities and what is being taught? For a lot of you, this will be really familiar stuff. I'm just organizing in a way that we might say, okay, these might be the basis, the starting places for supervisor moves. The next, responsive teaching. How is our teaching a living activity in concert, not opposed to, but in concert with the interests, needs, and aspirations our students bring to their learning? And then again, disciplinary teaching. How we move students into deep understanding of the disciplines, ensuring access to further study and life opportunities for students who have been traditionally restricted from such opportunities. And this is a big consideration, has been for a long time in mathematics. And some of you may know Bob Moses and the Algebra Project. That's a project that has been doing this work for a generation or more. Next, a lot of us talk about assets-based instruction. How does our planning and instruction start from understanding our students as capable, knowledgeable, and resourceful? And this one's the one that I'm working on and having to think about more deeply for myself, criticality. How do we enable and encourage our students to read, write, think, and speak in ways that consider and address power relationships and social structures in order to promote equity and move against oppression? So where does that show up in our seminars? How does that show up in our supervision, in our conferences? The next, home and community connections. How do we make students' community significant to our teaching, and how does our teaching connect students to their community? And the last one, this is the one we're going to focus on today, challenging spaces of marginality. How do we work to ensure that all students sense their belonging and are able to bring their full selves into the shared activity of our classroom? So we're thinking again about the case of teaching. This is the one we'll focus on for today. So we're going to go back to that case of teaching. So I'm going to give you more about this clip right now. This particular classroom I'd visited a few times before. You may have noticed the masks. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to actually go into classrooms at the end of the spring. It was so astounding for me to first visit my student teachers who I've been only teaching and working with through Zoom, to visit them in classrooms when they're first working with their own students for the first times as well. So one contextual thing is that for all of you, you probably had this experience too, student teachers who went into classrooms live this summer had to struggle with the fact that the classrooms had not established norms. The ways the classroom worked were just being figured out in March, April, May, or whenever they got back in. So some of what was happening in that classroom that you observed is because the norms had not been strongly established. Those kids had been Zoomed the whole year. The one persistent consideration that I had in that class and the few times I visited was equity of voice. Who speaks and what is spoken? And a lot of you tagged that when we went through the first time. Now here's another layer to it I want you to hold on to. The teacher, Chloe, is Latina. Jonah and Hat student are white boys, and Oceana is a girl of color. So we get layers of class, we get layers of gender and of race, all woven into this little bit of clip. So I want you to consider the distillation of frameworks that I set out above, but I really want us to think about now challenging spaces of marginality. How do we work to ensure that all students sense their belonging and are able to bring their full selves into the shared activity of our classrooms? So I'm going to share for you this clip again, but I want you to do this for yourselves, and then I want people, if you'd be willing to report down here. The first time we went through this, it was all about what do we see? This is what do we do? And we want to think about it as supervisors. What are the moves we might make to actually focus on this particular clip, this instance of teaching in terms of race and gender and voice, and making sure that everyone belongs. So I'll have you write for yourself. I'll put you in breakout rooms. And then if you want to, within the rooms, I'll have 8 rooms. How many folks we have? We have quite a few. In 8 rooms, if anybody wants to mark or write in one of those room spaces, we'll be able to discuss those things together. I hope the rooms won't be too large. So let's watch this one more time. Okay, just want to see thumbs up that we're good. We're ready to start with that. Okay, thank you all. Let's go back to the video. Okay, here we go again. Same piece.
Some small or bigger buildings and stuff like that, they would all overpopulate, and there would be nothing else except for some other species like, but I guess there's also Asian tigers there, but like, if they both go, they're both super rare, and so if they both go extinct, then nothing would be there to stop from overpopulating.
Awesome. Well said, Jonah. And I love that you used the word overpopulate. And the animals that your leopard eats, we're referring to as prey, right? So I think it was Layla, you gave us the word predator, right? Predator. And Jonah gave us the word prey. Does anyone know what predator means? What does it mean if something is a predator? I'm going to look for maybe a new hand. Is you, Oceana?
Like something that hunts prey, not necessarily the top of the food chain, but something that hunts and not prey.
Like, I'm thinking what you mean is like something that doesn't get eaten. Something, well, it could get eaten, but technically it's harder because that animal hunts for food instead of just finding food.
Exactly. Thank you for adding on to what Oceana said, Jonah. Something that hunts. Simply put. Very well said, Oceana. And so then what about prey? Then what does our prey mean? What does it mean for something to be prey?
Prey is like it's a predator's food, or something like its meal, like they hunt it. Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of predator. It's what gets eaten.
Right.
What eats.
So the predator hunts and the prey is hunted. Exactly. Could something be prey and a predator at the same time?
Yes. They're like a little bug can eat other little bugs, but then a bigger bug can eat that big bug, and then another bug, like that's how the food thing.
Exactly.
Like this thing eats this thing, and this thing eats that other thing, and it keeps going.
Totally. Awesome. And that leads us into our next activity.
Okay, so have these considerations and breakout rooms discuss this segment from the perspectives offered above in the framework that I offered. What matters? What considerations for supervision? What do you share with Chloe? What questions or prompts might you offer? So in each of the rooms, choose one person in the room to write thoughts in the table below. I hope the rooms aren't over large. Jane, shall we make 8 rooms for folks?
There's 47 participants, so I was thinking about 10, but we can do 8.
Okay, let me add a couple rooms then, okay? Let's go ahead and do that.
Let's do 10. Okay.
Yeah, let me add a couple rows. So in this particular case, if the student teacher, Chloe totally knew what was going on, and we had a good conversation about this, but if another student teacher had not noticed Jonah interrupting and the priority of voice for the boys, or particularly Jonah, then that would be something for me to note, and that would affect the way I would discuss the lesson with Chloe. The next one that came up is bring in pair share. This was a COVID thing too. We work really earnestly in the beginning of the year to talk about voice, who gets to speak. We do lots of modeling of pair shares, group work, etc. One of the things we try to move away from is single nomination teaching, which is something that you saw here, the idea that teacher calls on somebody, there's a response, the teacher responds, IRE, IRF, the whole back and forth thing where people are marginalized, and of course it prioritizes certain voices. In group 2, we talked a little bit about how this particular kind of single nomination prioritizes people who are quick on their feet, who can think quickly and say stuff, and who can call out and say things. And for the thoughtful ones, the ones who might take a minute more and say something wonderful, they get marginalized. So that's one of the reasons why we can think about pair shares. The other one that came up, who did you hear from? Who did you hear from, not hear from? I'm going to share a little story right now. Like I said, I do a lot of math education, and I was observing a math lesson in an upper grade classroom. It was about, this is 2 years ago, and my student teacher was doing a wonderful lesson, and she had some discussion going through some kind of problem solving with the kids. Within the space of 10 minutes, she called 18 boys and called on 2 girls. And she called on boys who didn't raise their hand, or boys who just called out. And what was interesting about it is I was sitting with the cooperating teacher at the time, and we were both, after a minute or two, we both looked at each other because we knew what was going on. When we started talking to the lesson about the lesson with the student teacher, she had no idea. And so my particular supervisor move at the moment was just to talk through who talked and who didn't, to make her aware of, for herself, to make some kind of judgment for herself. I didn't just say, look what you did. Here's who spoke, here's who spoke, here's who spoke, here's who spoke. This boy talked over the girl who had her hand raised, that kind of thing, just for her to pay attention to it for herself. That whole start with how Chloe felt it went at its start. Always start with their perspective. This one, whoever offered this one, thank you so much for this one, because this one did occur to me as I was sharing this. We can't make assumptions. So is there something about Jonah? Is there some aspect of neurodiversity where Jonah likes to talk out? And how do we think about that as part of our teaching? I've had students like that who just need to say things. And everybody gets comfortable with it after a while. I'm going to say in this case, no. This was very much a cultural expectation, a cultural norm in the classroom. In this particular classroom, the boys, with Jonah at the center, always called out. That's what they did. They developed a norm for themselves, that's how the class works. We are the boys, we talk out when we want to all the time. So, but this one is worth considering in terms of ways kids might participate. The other one that comes up for me, and I've been thinking about it for a while now, is kids who are quiet. How do we dismiss them, diminish them, think of them as a problem, when in fact being quiet is a different way of being? So how do we incorporate their thoughts as well? This I appreciate. Yes, I didn't give you enough context to the class, who speaks up, who is shy, what their interests are. I'm going to share that with you a bit right now. So this is what it looked like for me as the supervisor. I'm going to make some thoughts here. You can agree, disagree, or think about how you might do better. I was quite aware of Chloe purposefully acknowledging student contributions. That was one of the things that came up on our first table. She said, thank you for adding on to what Oceana said. Okay, or she acknowledged Layla. She would use kids' voices. She would write their names next to their contributions. So I knew she was doing that to elevate those students. So there's also status differences in the classroom that she was paying attention to. Some people had greater status than others, and Chloe was giving attention to that by saying the names of particular students. As a number of you said as well, my prompts in the lesson were purposefully open. I always start by simply listening, allowing Chloe to tell me the story of her teaching from her perspective, not insisting on what I think mattered. This allows me to hear what mattered to Chloe, but also what did not. So there's things I think maybe she should pay attention to. And I shared with you my story about the math observation. And my teacher move then was to show her who had talked. So in this lesson, the other thing that's difficult about sharing with you like this was a moment in time out of a lesson, out of a series of lessons. So I know Chloe over a course of time. I have some sense of her teaching over time. So focusing just on this moment doesn't give us the opportunity to think about bigger things. So in this particular lesson, this was one of a series of lessons. Like I said, I'd seen this classroom a few times. Who you don't see in the back of the classroom is a peer student, Sam. So she's also teaching this grade level, and they both shared in teaching this class. I met with both of them and we had a conference together. It wasn't just about Chloe and me, but Sam was teaching the same group of kids, and we started talking about the voices, problems with who spoke and why, and how all of that was, needed to be given attention to. So what the move was, the supervisor move was, what do we do about this? We work on expectations. So both Sam and Chloe started beginning every one of their lessons by sharing and being explicit about their expectations about who talks, how to share talk. It was intentional. So talk about that. So that was a purposeful supervisor move to address the inequity that was going on in the classroom. And then this is one that came up for a few of you as well. In seminar, I purposefully brought forth the problem of single nomination by the teacher. In group 2, I talked about this a bit too. This thing, and we all grew up with this. The teacher says something, a student responds. The teacher responds back, another kid says something. The back and forthing, and about how some kids are given priority because they can speak on their feet, they always call out, they know things, or the teachers biases towards kids, calling kids they know who will say the right things and not say out complicated things or the wrong things to embarrass people. So the whole thing about single nomination as being a problem, and some of you address this when thinking about pair shares or other ways kids might share their thinking through whiteboards or through technology. These are ways to think about it as well. So a little bit of my notes, and then we'll do one last thing for today. These were quick notes I was taking along the way. 8:17, I said, student agrees with Oceana's contribution and then adds on. So this is Jonah. You acknowledge his addition and give credit to Oceana. So you see that I'm not valuing it at all. I just say that this thing happened. And then I use the word spontaneously. Tend to have a couple boys who share spontaneously. And I give her a question. This is my question. I'm not telling her what to do with it, but this is the start of a conversation about the inequity that was going on. How do you feel about this? She didn't like it at all. And she'd been working on it for a while. At 18 minutes in, I noticed that this is later in the video, I noticed that she's working in such a way that Oceana and some other kids are talking more. So I acknowledge a change in her teaching that reflected some attention to equity of voice. And so at the very end, I said, as we talked about considerations for whose voices, variety of ways to talk and participate. That was just an opening for me. So we have a few minutes. But I had one more thing for us to do, which is think about supervision moves with challenging spaces of marginality. But we have about 3 minutes or so. I'll just open it up for questions. If you want to put a question in the chat, Jane, maybe you can help me. Or if Jane, if there's anything you want to add to what I've just shared that you noticed from the work we've done together. Questions or thoughts? And anybody's willing to put something out there for me.
Johnnie, I really liked the equity framework that you presented. One of the challenges that our program has, I think, is, like you said, the TPEs are so long, and we've identified some that have to be demonstrated in field work that maybe we don't necessarily or unable to specifically address during coursework. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of accreditation purposes or program purposes, what is the conversation or the priority that's placed on, say, the equity framework versus the TPEs? Or, are people continue to be kind of overwhelmed with the amount of things that need to be covered in a small amount of observation? I guess it's just it's not a question, it's just an observation.
Well, appreciate this, because I'm going to say that TPEs in the way they're written, they're a bit dehumanizing because they're atomized and they break apart what, if you think of teaching as an art, you don't think about the bits and colors and all that stuff. The thing that we've done in our program is, and a number of programs have done this, is gone through the TPEs and selected out the ones we want to emphasize. And so ours lines up. We have a wheel of social justice that we focus our equity practices on. So the ones we've chosen do focus on those, but as I showed you, the language does not necessarily shout out, pay attention this way. So it feels for us, it's like that's our job now, is how do we take those and then co-construct with peers, our group together, what do we do? So equity of voice might be one of the things that we note is one of the highlights, the things that we should always be paying attention to. So it's my hope, and I know it's the hope of my peers too, is that we have a handful, maybe from that list we shared from the framework, of things that are constant. Equity of voice would be one of them. I want you all to imagine the ones that might be constant for you as well. What are the things that you'd always bring in your back pocket, every conversation you have, any kind of move you make with your student teachers? Heather, does that help a bit?
Yeah, it does. And I think, I think my takeaway is kind of what you're saying is you have to kind of together come to a general consensus of what the focus of field work is going to be in relation to your program mission and also as your experience as educators. So it makes sense. Thank you.
Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Heather. We also have Dr. Kamathi who has their hand raised. Did you
Yes.
want to?
I wanted to know, can we share the equity framework, and will you share the social justice wheel that you have?
Celeste, could you put the wheel in the chat maybe? Is that all right? So Celeste,
Yeah, I can put the wheel. Yeah, I'll put the wheel.
and if you were to go to UC Santa Cruz and you looked up our education program, you would find the wheel very prominently.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Johnny, to respect people's time, I just want to remind you that it is 11:55 at this time.
And I'm going to be here for a few more minutes. Anyone want to ask any more questions? But thank you for sharing this time with me. I hope I've given you, and we've given you some good things to think about. Do take away, use whatever you've been offered here. It's all for you. Make good things for your student teachers. And as Nevis was saying, everything we do right for our student teachers does right for kids down the road, right? So thank you all.